welcome to the Boundless Book Club, the podcast from the Emirates Literature Foundation, where we talk about the books that are too good to keep to ourselves. You are here with
Andrea,
Ahlam,
and me, Annabelle. And we are excited to introduce our special guest today, Saeed Saeed, who is the arts and culture features writer for The National. You can check out his stories and much more at www.thenational.ae. Saeed, we're so happy to see you today.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So while we always like chatting with Saeed, we have invited him today in particular because of all the great creative people that he gets to meet and interview from all around the Arab world. And because today we are talking about the voices from the Middle East that we want everyone to know about. There are so many though, and this is just a small selection, so we will definitely have to revisit this topic. If you have any suggestions, you can let us know on social media, or you can send us an email at comms@emirateslitfest.com.
Right, so I'd like to ask Saeed a question to start with, which is, did you find it difficult to choose one book to talk about today?
Yes, it is, because especially now, especially like now in this current time, a lot of book lovers are even reading more than what they normally are. So trying to find a book to encapsulate some of the best things I've been reading for the last few months have been difficult. And this is why I took the shortcut and went for an anthology.
Good choice.
So I came to you with the greatest hits package. And that's
a great.
And that's the Baghdad Noir anthology, which I think is a superb read and an underrated gem that deserves to be highlighted.
That sounds great. It's a great cheat as well to choose an anthology.
And also look, I just kind of feel generally that I don't think anthologies are kind of given the respect that it deserves, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the times we kind of feel that anthology, for some reason, is a less superior piece of work to a novel. And I think people kind of view anthologies as a bit of a ragtag. Let's kind of put it together and just put it out by Christmas, but it's not really the case, because a really good anthology, if it's curated well, it is supposed to take you, and I don't like the word, it's very cliche, but in this situation, it applies, a journey, into a particular subject, into a particular time. So I think anthologies, should get the respect that it deserves.
Yeah, because unlike a novel where the reader is having a conversation with one author and there's that conversation going on, a good anthology is having multiple conversations, not just with the reader each time you read a different story, but they're all talking to each other as well. So there's all these different layers to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthologies in a way is almost similar to just being part in a great dinner conversation, because you're talking about one particular topic, but it just is discussed from many different perspectives, many different angles, that it could be historical, it could be social, it could be geographical. So I think in a way, an anthology, if done well, it can give you a greater insight into a topic than perhaps an epic book can.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also gives you, if it's something that you're interested in, it gives you so many more things to follow up with, which is wonderful. If you have an interest in writers from a particular region, but you don't know a lot about them, then that's perfect. And then suddenly you have 10 authors that you can follow for their entire career.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, anthologies actually, in a way, it can kind of work as both a stepping stone, into a particular topic. Like the other day, I've been, like, for example, because we've all been at home for a while, I've been binging on a lot of books, binging on a lot of television shows regarding the Roman Empire. So I just the other day from Amazon, I got an anthology, looking at the 12 different Roman Caesars, Roman Empire leaders over the last century. That's a great way to kind of get into this topic, and then kind of moving on. And also in another way, as well as being a stepping stone, an anthology can also be a valuable reference point. you know, as a journalist as well. It kind of gives me, you know, 10 different people to kind of chase to get that interview, to have that discussion.
Tell us about the Baghdad Noir.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess for me, it all started with an email. It's like, and the email says, you know, I mean, normally you get so many emails, you know, about books, you kind of skim through them, right? And then you kind of say, okay, I'll flag that and I'll get back to that, you know, in a couple of days later. But in this one, so the book that we're discussing today, you know, is Baghdad Noir. Baghdad Noir, it's an anthology of short crime fiction stories, you know, written by novelists, not all from Iraq, but all of the stories are based, you know, in Iraq. And for me, I thought that was really, really interesting because considering you know, Iraq, you know, has been, you know, for better or worse as well, you know, in the news over the last 2 decades. But more importantly, this idea of Arabic crime fiction.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you know, like, and which hasn't, you know, like, I mean, Arabic crime fiction hasn't, you know, really, you know, taken off per se. It's still kind of viewed in a way as a bit of a boutique interest, you know, in Arabic literary circles. And so I think this book, you know, the fact that it's kind of published, you know, in English, translated in English, I think it's really, really important. I think this is a kind of book that's going to be looked upon, you know, as a valuable reference point, you know, into this field. So
are all the authors in the book Arabs and written in Arabic?
No. Look, okay, so from the 12 or 13 authors that are in there, 2 are non-Iraqi. The rest, you know, are Iraqi.
Okay.
All of these books, the Baghdad Noir collection is all published in English. Some of them were written in the first language, English, while the majority of them has been translated from Arabic to English.
And who are some of the names that some of the names of the authors who have written in this anthology? Can you tell us some of the names?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, you know, the biggest, when it comes to the biggest name, the marketing, you know, is Ahmed Saadawi, you know, who we all know, you know, we all know the Frankenstein, for the Frankenstein of Baghdad, if I'm not mistaken. So he's like, you know, he leads, you know, the kind of the charge. But other writers as well, you know, we have Salima Saleh, we have Muhammad Alwan Jabir, we had Mahmoud Ahmed al-Saeed, and we also have as well, in terms of the, you know, and also Abdul Malik al-Nouri. So there's really interesting kind of people there. Again, it's not really about how important these authors are. You know, some of them, you know, they're just known for writing, you know, short Arabic fiction, you know, little pieces. But what's interesting here is about how it kind of vividly captures, you know, some of the nuances, you know, the gritty aspects, you know, of life in Iraq, from Baghdad, you know, to Mosul, to Basra and beyond.
Are they similar, these stories? When you read them, do they feel like they have anything more in common other than the setting?
I mean, and that's the really interesting thing, right? About, I guess, short stories, number one, and crime fiction, right? Because these are all genre pieces. I mean, it's not. I mean, a lot of these authors kind of respect the parameters, you know, that comes, you know, with writing short crime fiction. So there is straight away, you know, the setup, you know, there is the investigation, and then of course, and you know, and there's a conclusion towards it. So in that sense, a lot of these authors are kind of following, you know, what we, expect as crime fiction readers. So I think, you know, the thrill. I mean, part of the thrill, of course, is, you know, how these tightly coiled plots kind of unwind. How they kind of end. Some of them surprisingly, some of them not. But I think some of the joys, in this book is that kind of intimate look into everyday life in Baghdad. So we're talking about, the relationships, between, like, one thing that comes strongly here is the importance, of the shara, the importance of the street, like your neighbor, like, your neighborhood, is essentially, your universe, right?
Yeah.
Your building, the building where you live, is very important. Your neighbor, can be, your best friend or your mortal enemy. So it kind of shows you, through the, like, the importance, in Iraqi culture, of, the importance, of social interaction, the deep bond that people have with family, friends, and neighbors, which I think is really interesting, an interesting insight, into this book.
I wanted to ask Saeed, because unfortunately in recent times, when I think about literature coming from Baghdad, from Syria, from Palestine, my mind goes to a war zone. And I want to know if, the settings of the stories that are in Baghdad Noir, does it kind of show you, a pre-war Baghdad, or like a normal setting of Baghdad when it was before the instability and before the situation where it is today, and how it's reflected in today's literature? So is it more of like a domestic crime, if you can call it that, rather than a war zone?
I mean, most of the novels, most of these short stories are set, in the here and now. So the echoes of war is there,
present in the stories.
But it's interesting that you kind of mentioned that question, because one of the interesting thing, the best piece of writing, and this is absolutely no disrespect to all of the authors that are corralled together for this piece, it's the introductory essay, by the editor, the curator of this piece, the wonderful Iraqi novelist Samuel Shimon. So there's an amazing essay at the start of this book. It's called the Garden of Justice, City of Peace. And what he does is basically sets the scene, into how, I guess, the Iraqi crime novel came to be. And what, in that essay, Shimon kind of paints a picture, first of a multi-ethnic, pluralistic Baghdad, from the advent of the British invasion to the Ottoman Empire, and he talks about how that kind of laid the seeds, I guess, to the open-mindedness to come in Baghdad. And then he kind of describes, what he calls the American invasion of Baghdad, of Iraq in April 2003, and how from all of that upheaval came the Iraqi novel, the Iraqi crime fiction novel. It's almost kind of a response, to some of the tragic carnage and the disruption that happened there. So I think in terms of the discussion of Iraq pre-war, that can mostly be found in that introductory essay, where Shimon goes to great pains to say that Iraq isn't what you see. It isn't what you see today. It was actually it's a very pluralistic, multi-ethnic, open-minded society, and it is from there that that he provides the context for the preceding stories.
Wonderful.
That's great.
Yeah, and in terms of just like and in terms of the what Ahlam was saying as well, in terms of the context of a lot of these stories. The tragic situation aside, in Baghdad, it's fertile place for crime novels, for a plot. There's a lot of great, there's a lot of material there, that that an author can speak to. I mean, for example, and also different styles. There's one Salima Saleh. She writes a story called The Apartment, and that kind of adopts almost like a classic whodunit, Agatha Christie type of situation. Where you have like a wary cop, from a Baghdad district, police district. He kind of comes in to investigate the death, of an elderly lady, at home, and he's kind of interviewing like, all the neighbors. It's kind of quirky, yet interesting. While, for example, on the other side, you have Muhammad Alwan Jaber's. He wrote a book. His piece was called Room 22, and that talks about some of the violent kidnappings that we hear on the news, of political activists, of just anyone off the street. So he uses that as the plot. Okay, who abducted this person, right? So so in a way, so the authors sometimes use some of the things that we see on the news, while on the other hand, some of the authors kind of take a more kind of interesting, quirky, and traditional look towards their crime short stories.
That's really interesting, because when you said that you chosen a crime anthology, that was like one of the first things that went through my mind. Was crime is such a big genre, and you can have like cozy crime, you can have your your murder mysteries, and then you can have your really dark, graphic, some of like the Scandi noir stuff that we were talking about on an earlier show. And some of those books, like particularly the graphic ones for me, after you finish an entire novel length story in that style, like it can be a bit much. So something like an anthology is really good at giving you a stylistic break, I think, sometimes when a novel length is just, it's like it's a lot.
Yeah, because also, I mean, also the thing is as well, because in this one, it's also interesting as well, because what Baghdad Noir does, it kind of functions like on a number of levels, right? Because it's not like you're reading, a crime fiction, a crime fiction anthology based, in the UK, in Australia, or in the States, where you kind of know the setting already. So in a way, it's almost kind of like a very, very dark travelogue, into these neighborhoods that we don't even know about, So and I think. So as well as giving, your crime thrills as a crime fiction buff, it kind of gives you as well, little, intimate snapshots,
which is a huge part of the enjoyment, I think. When you look at Netflix today, and you have shows from all over the world, it's giving the viewer options. It's not what it used to be, where certain parts of the world sort of dictate what you watch, or we get our entertainment from certain parts of the world. And today, the world is open in terms of you choose what you want to watch and what you want to consume, and it's amazing to see that in literature as well.
Yeah, and absolutely. Look, and maybe there's another piece in that. Is this part of the Netflix effects? You know what I mean? In the sense that, where Netflix or just basically streaming services have kind of opened up, our minds, to eclectic content. We're living in an age now where subtitles isn't a problem. Like 15 years ago, subtitles, like, what are you doing? Are you reading a book or watching television? Like now, subtitles is so, in a way, I kind of do see this kind of ricochet effect, that is kind of coming on, to fiction. So I think in a way, this book is well placed, to be published. And and the best thing about this, going back to this idea, about the dark, and some of the gory details of crime fiction. The best thing about this, about this anthology, and for me personally, is thank God there's no bloody CSI type of plot. I'm so sick of seeing doctors in lab coats solving cases. They should be in the lab where they belong. You know what I mean? Like, look, it's just a guy or a girl with this pen and his notepad, no scalpel, no nothing. So this is what I enjoy about this piece, is just like, proper investigation. Not
Yeah.
not some young millennial coming in there, tweeting his, so for me, this kind of makes me personally extremely happy.
Saeed, how do you feel about the journalist investigating the crime and solving it?
Well, look, I mean, I think if the journalist is just hanging out with a cop, it's cool. But if it's like diagnosis murder, where you get an elderly GP running around, it's just like that's just not on.
Hey,
So,
I used to really love Diagnosis Murder.
Oh yeah. I mean, look, diagnosis murder kind of reminds me of the unemployment days. When you kind of at 12 p.m. having ice cream and you're wondering what are you doing with your life. So, yeah.
Yes. And on that note, I would like to know which book you chose, Ahlam, because I think that was a more of a book that you need more time for. Is that right? Perhaps if you are on the sofa having your ice cream.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I have a little bit of a girl crush on this author because I keep talking about her on and on. But Buthaina al-Essa is the author that I want to talk about. And actually, Buthaina is really special to me personally because when I first started to work with the Emirates Literature Foundation, I just joined to work on a small project. And at that time, I went to Kuwait on a business trip. And I was there sort of trying to reach young people, attracting more youth to the Emirates Literature Festival. And I met a couple of key, authors or literary personalities in Kuwait to try to go through them to reach their communities. And Buthaina is one of the people that I met there. And so she's an author, but she studied medicine and she switched because she's just always loved literature. And at some point she just, she couldn't do anything else. And she's such an incredible, powerful voice in the literary scene in Kuwait. She was even one of the key people pushing for changing the laws on censorship in Kuwait, which just changed on the 25th of August, where there was about 5,000 books banned in Kuwait, and then the parliament just voted to loosen those laws and allowing publishers to publish books as they wish, sending just a list of names and authors, and they would only look into a ban of a book if there is a public complaint, and then it's only the court that can rule now on whether a book is banned or not. So it's a huge change, and she's been speaking out about this for over a year now, and she's an amazing voice in Arab literature. But she also has this really cool bookshop in Kuwait called Takween, where every single person who works in the bookshop just has so much insight, and the books are curated in that, when you go in there and you're like, what are you looking for? They'll be like, no, that's not for you. Don't take that book. Take this or take that. And it's just such a personal experience. And the conversations that I had with Buthaina herself on that trip actually made me feel like, oh my God, I love this industry and I just want to work in this industry forever. So she's been really influential on me personally. But the book that I love of hers is Khara'at al-Tih in Arabic. Unfortunately, it's not been translated. Another book of hers has been translated, which I'll tell you guys about. But Khara'at al-Tih means, I guess, maps of loss, if you were to literally translate that. And it's a story of a young Kuwaiti couple who have a 5-year-old son. And they go to Hajj one year. They take their son with them. And then their son is lost in Hajj. Amongst like millions of people, and the experience that they go through after losing their son, and the journey, and what that does to their relationship, what that does to their faith, what that does to their mental states individually. They're in this journey together, but both of them have very different approaches of dealing with this situation. And the journey of the little boy, it's just, it's horrific, but just, it's the kind of book that you just can't put down, and so well written and so powerful. And there's so much, although it's fiction, but there is a lot of research that's gone into this book, and you can tell that, there's a lot to think about in terms of what they go through. But it's an amazing book. I really, really do hope it gets translated very soon. I think there have been translators who have been wanting to do that, but Buthaina just wants the right right person to do it, because the story is absolutely incredible.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
How long is he lost for? Is he lost the entire throughout the book? I'm having palpitations here.
He's lost for a while, and there's the boy has a journey as well. So it's not like it's not like a momentary thing where it gets resolved. It's a journey. It's a book-long journey. So it's horrific from every perspective, but also so interesting to just follow and see where things go, and what it does to every person involved, especially the parents. But the book of hers that has been translated is كبرت ونسيت أن أنسى, which in English I think is called All That I Want to Forget. And it's the story of a girl called Fatima who loves poetry and loves French literature, and that's what she wants to pursue. But she has a very conservative brother who thinks that the right path for her is something totally different, and so she's kind of stuck under pressure of living under her brother's roof. And then she meets a man who has similar interests to her and loves poetry as well, but then she's sort of married off to someone different by her brother, who isn't quite as much of a tyrant as her brother is, but still he's not someone she chose, and he's not what she's looking for. And it's an interesting story of what Fatima goes through as well. But it's a great start for someone who hasn't read any of Buthaina's work, and then hopefully Khara'at gets translated very soon, because this is an amazing book. I gift it to a lot of people.
Ahlam, I'm just wondering, right? Because covering the Arabic literary scene, I guess, for 8 years, particularly the awards, right? What I've always found with books from Kuwait, is that a lot of the plots cover kind of hot button social topics. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we're generalizing here. So I'm trying to be careful, where I kind of find, where, particularly covering the International Prize for Arabic Fiction, right, for the last 10 years. I mean, you find a lot of works kind of exploring, politics, exploring history, but I just find with Kuwaiti authors, they've been really kind of interested in, in the nuances of relationships, between mother and father and daughter. Is that something as well that you kind of see from Kuwaiti authors? Saad al-Sanusi, we saw that, and you kind of see that also as well?
I think you see that from any society where literature and arts and culture is strong. And I think in Kuwait in particular, it's very, very strong. The literary scene there is a literary event every single day, multiple, in small groups. And it's just such a rich literary culture. And I think any culture that has that many authors, that many artists, relationships and family dynamics and, relationship dynamics and the human contact is like, it's where sort of art is formed. A lot of art is formed all over the world. So I think Kuwait, it comes from that angle, the fact that there's such a rich arts and culture scene.
Yeah, you're right. Because I think in a way, what Kuwait does, it kind of shows that what they have done, not just in the literary scene, but the whole art scene in Kuwait, is that it kind of shows that it showed people there that art and life go hand in hand. You can use art to discuss. While I guess for me, what I found, for example, in other societies, in the Arab world, the idea of fiction is still kind of viewed as an academic pursuit. You're a novelist, yani, okay, then this is a very big thing. So you have to, you have to write about something important, whatever quote unquote important is. So I think it's really interesting what you're saying. Yes.
Whenever we're in the office, Ahlam, you always mention, this is a great book, I can't wait till it's translated into English. And so there's this like long list of books that I can't read yet, and it's very frustrating. But what's the book, Saeed, that always does that to you, where you're like, I really wish this were available in translation for a wider audience? Like, what's the book that you can't wait to be translated?
But the thing is, for me, I think like honestly, because the work that I've been doing here for the last 8 years, a lot of the time, I interact now more than ever. I interact, with Arabic text, as soon as it's translated into English, because that actually means a story. I mean, and that's the thing, because for me, it's always hard. I mean, I guess the frustrating part about the job that I do is that it's really hard to write about about a great Arabic novel that has not been translated into English. I mean, sometimes, we kind of do, if it wins the Najib Mahfouz Prize or the International Prize for Arabic Fiction, yes, that's fine. But it's always that balance, right, between letting the readers know, that this is a great book, but at the same time, it's tough because a lot of readers can't read it. It's almost like telling somebody this is a great party, but you're not invited. So
that's how it feels.
So.
Well, except we have a platform here, and there might be some translators watching us, and they might actually come and pick it up. So speak up.
Yeah, but that's happening. You're seeing now a lot. You're seeing a lot more interest, coming, when it comes to Arabic books, and not just even translation. And Ahlam, you know more of this than anyone. It's not just translations, into the primary languages of English, French, German. You're seeing, Brazil, you're seeing, Portuguese, you're seeing Chinese. So I think you're seeing more Arabic texts, spreading much widely at a rapid pace.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I want to get into, so I know that Annabelle, today you're going to be talking about a book that's been on my reading list for ages, and it's been translated to English, which is how you know about it.
Yeah. So I'm going to be talking about Azazeel by Youssef Ziedan. And I actually specifically went looking for about a week for something to read new for this podcast, because I think when I was looking through the books that I'd already read, most of them were about war, or were, I think, from the perspective of multiple generations of women. And so I was familiar with kind of that point of view, and I wanted to move away from that. I wanted to find something that was a completely different perspective. And I found the perspective of a monk in the 5th century AD. And I thought, okay, well, that's far enough removed from most things that I've read recently. Let's give that a go. And I didn't, if you look at my bookshelf here, I've got things like Horns by Joe Hill. I've got many Lucifer comics as well. So the idea of a story, it's got such a strong conceit, which is this monk is kind of visited by Azazeel or Satan and compelled to kind of confess his memoirs, just seemed like the perfect book to me. And it was a roller coaster of a ride, because I started this book and you know what, it was actually really, really boring. It was not what it promised me in the marketing material. But then it ended up, it was a real slow burn. And then by the time it picked up, I was completely hooked, and I absolutely love it now.
Yeah.
But the way it's framed is you're met not with like a great hook of a first line. It starts with a note from the translator. So the translator says kind of, I've passed away now, and so now I'm allowing this to be published. And he explains that in these archaeological ruins, the 30 scrolls from this monk, his memoir, have been discovered, and he has translated them, and he's sharing them with the world now. And the whole...
Is that right? Has the translator passed away?
No, so I think that the whole, it was translated by Jonathan Wright, but the translator's note is part of the story. And that's the kind of conceit of the novel, and the way it starts is with a translator's note. And I've thought about this quite a bit, because I would much rather have cut like the first like 2 chapters, and I think it would have been stronger plot wise. But if you think back in hindsight, it actually doesn't really work. It definitely feels more like a authentic historical document, which kind of adds power to the whole story by it starting more slowly, by it starting as a kind of historic document. And it reminded me a lot in the beginning, if anybody's, you know, read Dracula, where it's all written in the first person. So there is a sense of immediacy there where you're constantly, you know, with this monk as he's living his life. And there's all this foreshadowing. So you're meeting him in the present moment where he's talking to his monk mates and hanging about with them. And there's all this, but I couldn't he's always talking about how he couldn't bear to talk about what happened in Alexandria or what happened then. So there's all this foreshadowing happening, but there's no real conflict in the beginning, which I think holds you back as a reader. And you're constant, I personally, I think I'm so used to kind of very specific formulaic narrative structure. I don't know where, and it kind of threw me that there was no real conflict, and it was just constantly hinting at something is to come. I'm like, well, get to it. But then when he finally goes to Alexandria, and he's disguised as a peasant, he's not got his monk robes on, and he kind of, in that city, he succumbs to temptation. You know, there's a beautiful woman, ... And he's kind of wrestling with that from the point of view of his faith. But then there's all this frustration and tension between different religious sects as well. And so this book is just phenomenal in that the monk character of Hyper is like this blank canvas, and you're seeing the 5th century AD and all of its historical religious tensions through his eyes. And it's incredibly interesting if you're interested in the history of the period, if you're interested in the history of the church and things like that. It's a really great book to read. I had a bit of a girl crush moment myself when he meets Hypatia, who's this famous astronomer, mathematician, philosopher. And when he meets her and he goes to one of her lectures, it's just amazing. And that kind of made the whole novel for me. I thought, right, I give this 5 stars now because he's met Hypatia and he's fangirling over her the same way that I would fangirl over her, which is brilliant. So you get to meet all of these figures from history, which gives me a little bit of a thrill. But then again, I'm also the kind of person who, like, if you're familiar with Assassin's Creed, there's a version of that video game called Odyssey where you, as you're, you know, fighting and you're going on your quest, you get to meet people like Socrates in that, and there's a little bit of, oh, the Socrates, how fun. So yeah, it is an utterly absorbing read, as the Spectator says, but it takes a while to get going, but it's worth it in the end.
I think I'm gonna read the Arabic, and then we're gonna sit and compare and see.
Yeah, let's do that.
I mean, Annabelle, I remember I read that book a couple of years ago, and I kind of felt something similar. But then I remember a book friend of mine said, when I shared with them some of the same misgivings, like the book is it's a bit tough going in the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. He said that the way that he viewed it is that style kind of matched, you know, the unfussed, you know, the simplicity of the monk's personality. So in a way, once he kind of said that to me, I kind of like reappraised it, because I thought, come on, get on with it. But then I thought maybe what that style was showing is that, you know, the way he was writing it was almost kind of to the rhythm. You know, of the monks kind of.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Is that true? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly. So when I mentioned that it felt more authentic when I thought about it, that's exactly why. It's because it's not going to be Mission Impossible if the character's a monk. You know, they're not, you know, renowned for being the most kind of exciting lives, I suppose. Like it's very straightforward. It's very sparse, I would say. But that's one of the things I really liked about the style of the book. The more I got into the story and the more that gradually developed, was the language is not unnecessarily flowery at all. He just talks about who he meets, how he meets them, And for me, that was just enough, because that's something that I personally don't like too much. I don't like very lyrical language. And so I really was grateful for that by the end of it, that it was kind of, that it was simple.
For anyone who might want to pick this book up, how much of the book would you say it's a slow start? What should a reader expect?
Okay. Well, I started folding down pages. Page 24, it started picking up. And then at
24, that's not bad.
Page, when he goes to Alexandria, basically, is when things really start getting interesting. So I think page 50 pages, which is standard. You give a book 50 pages before you decide if you want to move on, or should I stay or should I go?
Enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was worth it. You know, we were talking about this before, that not every book is meant to be the Da Vinci Code in terms of plot. You know, that's why that's why there are
we're
different
very
books.
thankful.
But the thing is, we, you know, in our team, like, and Saeed, you too, I mean, our jobs require us to read a lot. And so when something is not immediately gripping, we're kind of becoming, you know, we're like, okay, I've got a pile that big. So, I mean, I've got piles that we need to go through all the time. So it's like, when it's not immediately gripping, we're a little bit becoming less patient, I think, in our team.
Yeah, I mean, I have moved from the 50 pages to 75 pages now. You know, I felt because I felt a little bit guilty, you know, after 50 pages. You know, so but after 75, it's like, look, we should see other people.
Life is too short for that.
I like you, but inshallah next time, you know.
It is. It's like dating. Oh my gosh.
But you know what though? Just the thing about that book, I think it was very important to give a shout out, you know, to Jonathan Wright, the translator, because you know he is like, you know, if you are reading translated books, Arabic books, that name, you know, he pops up everywhere. You know,
absolutely.
I mean, this gentleman did, you know, Frankenstein in Baghdad, you know, Saad al-Sanusi, The Bamboo Stalk, you know, so as well as Azazeel. So I mean, he's almost becoming like now the premier translator, you know, in terms of the Arab, you know, in terms of the Arab. And I think, you know, he's a person which I really plan to interview, because I think what he has given us, you know, is so much. You know,
he's one of the reasons I picked this up. He's one of the reasons I actually bought this.
Yeah,
absolutely. There's an art to what he does, definitely.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like Annabelle, you're saying he's one of the reasons you picked this up, and non-Arabic speakers or English speakers who want to familiarize with themselves with Arabic literature, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to search who's the best translators, right? And then look at what titles they've worked on. So him and Marilyn Booth, you know, and names like that, they're becoming known for picking up these gems that become award winners and globally recognized. So they're doing a huge service to the Arab world for sure, but from a marketing standpoint as well.
And the thing is, like with Marilyn Booth and Jonathan as well, like a lot of the interesting thing about translators, which really kind of fascinates me, is from what angle they approach their craft. Like, you know, some of them approach it through, you know, a pure, like, you know, an academic sense, where they kind of understand, you know, the nuances, you know, the little ticks of the Arabic language, while Jonathan comes from a journalistic background. You know, so he understands. So he was a former Cairo bureau chief. So he kind of understands, you know, the heft of the word. You know, because sometimes translators, they try to overcompensate. You know, in terms, you know. So what Jonathan does is very kind of his translations are very stripped back. You know, like, you know, and I think, you know, he almost has his kind of own style of translation, but you have to be like super geeky to kind of really get into that. So he's really interesting.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah, I really like that.
So, and Andrea, when you were looking for books, were you focused on kind of who the translator was? Is yours in translation? No. What have you got?
No, so it was hard to choose one, but then I just went through my bookshelves, as you do, and picked up something I hadn't read for a really long time. So from we've all had very different books, and this is taking us across the Gulf and back to the 1990s. This is a book called Embroideries by Marjane Satrapi, who is really well known for her autobiographical book Persepolis, which is a graphic novel, and it was made into a movie that was really great. And this is of the same world, but a completely different scenario and different type of story, in that this story starts, it's at a very comfortable home in Tehran, and the story starts when the men leave the room after dinner, which is a perfect start to this story, which is about women. I think you mentioned, multi-generational women. It's wonderful. It's the women. It's Marjane herself. It's her mum. It's her grandmother, and neighbors, friends, and they all kind of gather around a samovar to partake in their favorite activity, which is gossip. And the grandmother is just like such a star. I wonder if she was alive when this was written. I wonder how she thought of herself, the portrayal of her in this, because it's amazing. One of the stories that Marjane tells is how her grandmother is an opium addict. So she starts off the morning being really, really grumpy and vile to everybody. And then as the day progresses and she takes her little medicine, she becomes very charming. And then obviously when this story takes place, she is very, very charming. She tells Marjane, when Marjane was younger, she says, "Marjane, your eyes are too wide open. When I was younger, I would just take a little tiny bit of opium and my eyelids would get droopy and it would make me more attractive to men." And she recommends this to her granddaughter.
Hey.
And that's one of the only stories from this book that I can retell, because it's actually quite scandalous, because it's all these women sitting around. This is in the days before
Buys
the
copy
internet.
Now, just looking in.
It's the 90s in Iran. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have sex education. This was where it happened. It was behind closed doors when the men had left the room for a nap. And the stories that they're sharing in this book is they're scandalous. They are really deeply personal. They are absolutely heartbreaking and hilarious. It's just, I was so delighted to read this book again because it's so funny. The granny refers to gossiping about others as to speak behind others' backs as a ventilator of the heart, which makes it seem much nicer than what it really is.
Yeah. Perspective. It's all about perspective.
It's all about perspective. And like we've said many times, I would love to be in the room when these conversations are happening. Although if this was my mum, my granny, like my family, I would be mortified. I would be blushing the entire time.
But I feel like that's such a typical Middle Eastern setting, in that, once the men leave, that's when the conversation gets interesting, right? That's when everything is unleashed. It's like our weddings.
Saeed leaves the chat.
Yeah.
No. I mean, however, may I just say, right? The thing about the men leaving, right? I mean, I guess the biggest misconception, that people kind of feel is that when the men leave, or like when they go to hang out at the coffee shop, all we're talking about is like sports or whatever. No, we are just as bad. You know what I mean? We talk about, marriage, family. When are you getting married? You know what, bro? You put some garlic on your head, your hair will grow back. All this kind of weird things. So we do things kind of like in our own way.
I guess it's that curtain between men and women in Middle Eastern culture, right? Where you gotta sort of hold yourself back in a setting where there's men and women, but as soon as we're like separated, that's when you're you sort of unleash and it all comes out, and you're sort of your more authentic self or more comfortable to talk about certain topics that you do. You just don't do it in the presence of the opposite sex.
Yeah. There's also the when you live in a society where you don't have when you don't have the internet, you have no one to ask, is this normal? And it kind of just grows inside you until you are at a stage where you're gonna have to talk to someone or you'll explode. And I think that's what happens in this. You really have to get it. It's wonderful. And then it ends. I've just got to show you. It's got like these beautiful illustrations. This is when he's kind of asking
leaving
what
the
they're
room.
talking about. Yeah.
Oh.
It's got pictures in it.
It's a graphic novel. It's
amazing.
all pictures.
Sold.
And yeah.
So Marjane actually writes in English, right? So it's not translated.
So she grew up in Iran and then left for France. So she writes a lot in French, which is translated from French to English. And I think Persepolis was written originally. The screenplay was written in French originally because she was thinking about how their voices were going to sound reading the lines on video, and she didn't want it to be translated.
Yeah. We had Marjane at the Emirates Festival of Literature, I think, in the early days. I can't remember if it was the first or second year of the festival, but she came.
Yeah,
she's incredible.
What's the rule? I mean, not as a rule, like, because I think about this as well. What is a good time frame to go back to your bookshelf and revisit a book? Is the best time to revisit a book that you read is when you totally forgot the plot? You know, I mean, like for you, Andrea, like when do you decide? Because for me, I kind of feel if I know the story already or how it's gonna end, I kind of say, well, you know what? I still know you. I need to forget about you for a couple more years now to go back. So for you, like, what makes you kind of go back?
Well, doing this podcast is a good reason to revisit a lot of books. But I think it depends on why you're revisiting them. One of the books I've read the most times in my entire life is a book by Philip Pullman, which I read as a really, really young age. And reading that again, I can pick it up and read like a couple of chapters and it just brings me back. And it's a bit like going to visit your parents. It just has lovely feeling of familiarity. So I don't need to forget that. Whereas some other books, I think I'd pick them up when I don't really remember what happens, maybe.
I always underline.
I never done that. Yeah. I never done that, going back to kind of revisit. I'm going to try that, actually. That's a good call.
So I always underline the parts of a book where it really resonates with me. So I have lines all throughout the book. So for me, when I go back to an old book that I just kind of want to see those parts that I loved, it's really easy to see. I just skim through and read those lines. I've never actually reread an entire book twice.
Yeah, no, I don't think I've done that either. Like I'll go back, particularly with like children's books, Philip Pullman, Harry Potter as well. I remember there was the only time I think I've reread books in their entirety was purely it was when I was doing my A-level exams and everything was incredibly stressful, and all I wanted was something cozy and familiar that I knew, and I reread the entire Harry Potter series. Did I have the time to do that? Absolutely not. Did I do it anyway? Yes, I did.
But that's a great excuse. I mean, sometimes when you just want something where you know what's going to happen in the end, you want that feeling of familiarity. That's a great excuse to go back to a movie or a book that you love.
Yeah, but for the most part, I don't, especially with grown-up novels. If I'm not like, there's so many other books to read that I get anxious. Why am I still reading this? Let's move on.
Same.
But that said, I think I have friends who reread books multiple times, and I think you get something completely different from it if you can make yourself do it. But if you are driven by plot, then it's very difficult because you're kind of skimming the bits, so you don't get anything new.
So I spoke to Kate Moss, who obviously she wrote Labyrinth and all those sorts of historical fiction books. And she's a massive fan of Wuthering Heights. It's like one of her favorite books. And she did this, we were talking about anthologies earlier. She edited this anthology inspired by Wuthering Heights, which is really, really interesting. Some really weird stories in there. Like the range of the stories is great. And she was saying, she had an interview that she rereads it like every decade of her life. So she's read it in her teens, she's read it in her 20s, she's read it in her 30s, she's read it in her 40s. And each time there's something different in it. And I find it really interesting, the idea of kind of setting this book and rereading it every decade of your life. And when she told me about this, I'm not the kind of person that does this and rereads books, but it did make me curious as an experiment to pick a book and do that with it, and then kind of document the process.
Yeah. And also, I think it as a reflection of how much you personally have evolved, whether it's through your reading habits or who you are as a person. If there was a book that was, your favorite book as the 16-year-old, if you go back and read that, would those words still resonate with you? Or, have you grown so much since that it's a nice reminder of who you were, but, as a reflection of yourself? It's an interesting comparison.
Yeah, and then you think, which book would you choose to read every 10 years? Because if I'd chosen a book at the age of 17, I might not want to read that again every 10 years. Okay,
so that's it for now. Really good to have you on the episode, Saeed. And everyone who's listening, take a look at the show notes for the details of the books we've talked about today, and let us know what you think. Who's your favorite author from the Middle East? Don't forget, wait, let me do that again.
The bloopers.
Okay. That's it for now. Thank you all for tuning in, and it's really awesome having you on the episode today, Saeed. Take a look at the show notes for the details of the books we've talked about today, and let us know what you think. Who is your favorite author from the Middle East? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and leave us a rating, send us an email, or a carrier pigeon if you prefer. We love hearing from you. Please get in touch. And until next time, take care. Speak soon. Bye.